Welcome to the Unstoppable Freedom Podcast. I'm Jimmy Page. Today we're going to talk about a topic that I believe is one of the most important topics that directly affects every aspect of the development of our kids into healthy, successful, and morally courageous leaders in our communities. That topic is sex education, and more specifically, sexual risk avoidance. Comprehensive sex education curriculum has been implemented in virtually every school in America, regardless of whether you're in a red or a blue state, and it's effectively robbing your kids' innocence, creating confusion around gender, and failing to equip our kids with the truth and tools that they need to navigate their teen years successfully, to avoid sexual risks that can damage their physical and emotional health and derail their future. So our guest today is an expert in these areas. Her name is ANNE MOSACK. ANNE is the president and CEO of Ascend, a nonprofit organization that equips the sexual risk avoidance field to help youth thrive. ANNE, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here.
You bet. Well, this is a really, really big topic. And truthfully, what brought this topic of helping our teens avoid sexual risk for me was your press release. Your press release revealed that our government, that funding designated for implementation of sexual risk avoidance education programs, which, as you will say, empowers youth to avoid sexual risk, has been eliminated by the Department of Labor, Health, and Human Services and all of the Appropriations Act of 2023. So tell us, as we get started, tell our audience what sexual risk avoidance education is.
Okay, well, sexual risk avoidance education is actually primary prevention when it comes to a risk behavior. So it is the same message that we would give students or even adults on smoking. You know, if you don't smoke, don't start. If you are smoking, let us help you stop. So sexual risk avoidance is not simply about telling kids how to reduce their risk in sexual activity. It is how to eliminate that risk. So we're all about optimal health, and it is a wonderful alternative to comprehensive sex education, which goes along with the premise that kids are going to have sex anyway. And so we need to, give them condoms and contraception at early ages so that they can reduce their risk.
Right. I love that comparison. So I wasn't expecting that. The comparison to smoking, for example, a behavior that we know now, of course, when my parents were kids, they didn't know that smoking was necessarily bad for you, and they would even say they started when they were teenagers and it was a behavior that made them cool. Right. Mm-hmm. But when you link that idea that, hey, we wouldn't tell kids today to start smoking as teenagers. In fact, we probably wouldn't tell them to start smoking at all. But I love the idea that you're not trying to reduce the risk. You're trying to avoid behavior that can be destructive, especially at those younger ages of life. Is that true?
Absolutely. And, I think we have some built-in examples of it. They're very current. And when you think about primary prevention, what has the CDC been telling all of America and world for the last 2.5 years? We can talk about the efficacy of those primary prevention methods, but what were they saying? Wash your hands, do social distancing, wear a mask, and the purpose was to prevent. Not just to reduce your risk, but to prevent it. They wanted, that was what it was. It was a primary prevention kind of public, population-wide effort. Well, this same concept is what we teach in sexual risk avoidance education. It's not a new concept, but it very accurately makes a difference between the two approaches, risk reduction versus risk elimination.
I love that, and as a parent of 4 kids, that are all grown now, this idea of preventing is a really big deal, right? Because you're telling your kids to prevent certain things. You're teaching them about the benefits of things, the risks of things, and you're teaching your kids to apply wisdom, right? The one thing that you just said is, the CDC had these guidelines during the last couple of years, and of course we can argue about the the effectiveness of their prevention strategies, which of course now we know. Anyway, that's another topic.
Absolutely.
The interesting thing there is I can't believe how often our government gets things wrong. Like they are, if you were to put it on a scale, they're probably wrong on just about everything. This topic of sexual risk avoidance, prevention, in my view, they're completely wrong on, and the data would show that, right? I mean, the data would tell us that the strategies of hypersexualizing our kids versus helping them to make decisions to wait and be responsible, those statistics are pretty disparate, aren't they?
They definitely are. And speaking of statistics, and I hope your listeners will appreciate this, right now, and I know this will sound very antithetical to what we're talking about, kids are having less sex now than they did 25 years ago. In the age group of 15 to 17, the CDC does what's called a youth risk survey, behavior survey. And they have found that more like in terms of males, 72% of males in that category report not having sex. 66%.
Wow.
So we would argue that they're actually having less sex now, and that we should be continuing to reinforce that positive trajectory rather than early sexualization by giving them too much too soon, and also inappropriate information.
Yeah.
So.
And, it's interesting you say that. And I wonder why that is, right? I wonder why this is true of this age group. I wonder if it's because they're so distracted by social media, or because we're extending adolescence into our mid-20s now. I mean, we're failing to launch, right? We're not preparing our teenagers to be upstanding, strong, courageous, morally principled people who are taking responsibility at 13, 14, 15 years old. We're delaying that till their mid-20s, heck, even into their 30s now. I wonder if that has something to do with this.
Absolutely. There's a lot of folks who have positive why those numbers are the way they are. The isolation of the internet, access to pornography. There are a lot of things. We just don't have any definitive studies that say this is why kids are having less sex. But that doesn't mean that they are not being sexualized. And what we are doing is accommodating every kind of sexual proclivity. And we're calling that kind of progressive and enlightened and affirming, if you will.
Yes.
Classroom.
Yes. Okay. This is a big topic, right? Because we have in all of our comprehensive sex education now, which is, by the way, kind of the policy across the country. This really doesn't matter where you live anymore, because this is led by the unions. This is led by the National Education Association. This is led by the Teachers Union. You have to really fight now to not have that sexualized curriculum happening in the earliest days when kids are 4 and 5 years old. Is that one of the current concerns that you see today? Is this earlier and earlier and earlier assault on the innocence of our kids?
Absolutely. I'm actually writing an article right now called The Violation of Vulnerabilities. So you have young children, right? And let me back up. I think right now we have individual activists and organizations that are really dedicated to social engineering, not just for young children, but for society in general, that want to regulate how we think about sex and sexuality. And what better place to start than to manipulate very vulnerable young children with radical sexual ideologies, under the guise of all kinds of really good sounding things like social and emotional learning, or, good touch, bad touch. But what it boils down to is too much, too soon. And it's a violation of so many things we know, even about psychosocial development of children. I mean, it's a horrendous sexualization, but it is definitely an agenda. I will say too,
no
Planned
question.
Parenthood, for your listeners, is the largest sex educator of our children now.
Okay, I want you to repeat that, because most people don't believe it, but it's true. Say that one more time.
Planned Parenthood is the largest sex educator of our children in schools across America right now.
And if you think that you might live in a conservative area, you might live in a red area, whatever you want to think, or you might have just moved to a red state and you think this isn't happening in your state, you've got a rude awakening coming, just so you know. Planned Parenthood is involved in curriculum around the country, probably around the world. And most of us, many of us, certainly half the country is not excited about the industry that Planned Parenthood is involved in. And we certainly don't want them involved in creating curriculum for our kids, do we?
Absolutely. The more kids have sex, the more unplanned pregnancies there are. That is actually a pipeline to the abortion industry. So now
Wow.
I will say this in sexual risk avoidance and at Ascend, we do not conflate the two issues, but we
Yep.
do challenge Planned Parenthood because they are the authors of some of the most outrageous and explicit sex education materials you have ever seen. And I know that your
Yeah.
listeners are probably above average in terms of awareness. And I
Yeah.
find myself that way. I've been doing this for 20 years. And I was just sent a book called It's Perfectly Normal, the 2021 edition. And the graphics in this are absolutely pornographic by anyone's standards. Mutual masturbation, just I could go on and on. I don't need to describe the
Yes.
graphics, but I
Yeah.
will guarantee you that this is the brand, this is the explicitness that we're talking about. And
Yes.
Jimmy, it has gone far beyond condom demonstrations in classrooms. We are now promoting trans identities,
Yes.
and gender fluidity, and taking advantage of students right at the time. If you don't mind, give me a little liberty here to talk about,
Yeah.
puberty. So kids at
Yeah.
that age, their bodies are changing, right? And it's almost like it feels like a betrayal. Who am I? And they have all these
Yeah.
things that are going on, and they're also at the same time our educational, Piaget theories and talking about child development will tell you that they're trying also to define who they are. What it's called
Yes.
ego identity. They're trying to find that. So
Mm.
coupled, they had this layer of physical, emotional, psychosocial things all going on at the same time. And then right at that time, we're saying, oh, you can decide. This is a great time for you to make life altering decisions about your sexuality and your gender. And it just
Yes.
defies not only common sense, but everything we know about social science and medical research.
Exactly. I think the thing that's hard for good people to get their head around is how diabolical this actually is and how disturbing it is. I mean,
Mhm.
one of the areas that we've been really active in is getting people to show up at their school board meetings and expose this garbage. Literally
Yeah.
bring books to the school board meeting, read the content,
Yes.
show the pictures. In the vast majority of these moments, the Board of Education will shut down your sharing that information because it is inappropriate for an adult to read it in public. And yet we offer it to our 6, 7, 8-year-old kids in the libraries, and we don't see a problem with this.
Yeah, right. We don't see a problem, but you know,
I mean,
anyone who has two eyes and common sense, and even
yes,
just a thinking person, and
yes,
especially if you have children, young children. I have grandchildren now, and when I think
yes.
about, oh my word, they're going to put this in front of them.
Oh, can you
Yeah,
imagine?
and
It will
this is
scar
what,
it'll scar them, won't it? I mean, it's going to scar their mind and
yeah,
their spirit
yes,
and their emotions.
yes, because they can't process it. It's
No.
cognitively way above their ability to process. And
Yeah.
so they come in under the guise of good touch, bad touch. Oh, we just want to teach kindergartners so we can reduce sexual abuse, but that is not really what they do. They are using so many seductive ways to teach our children. I reviewed a
Yeah.
curriculum recently, and they also endorsed by Planned Parenthood that
Mhm.
they use toys to begin a conversation with kindergartners. is there an adult telling you that you can't play with certain toys because you're a girl or you're a boy? And that's how the conversation begins, right?
Wow.
And then you
Wow.
you go through the lesson plan and you can see it build. It's very seductive. And then
Yes.
but when you boil it down, it's really an attempt to get these very young vulnerable children to
Yes.
ignore what their parents are saying to them.
Yes. It's
It's
amazing
absolutely
how
amazing.
it's unacceptable, isn't it? Right. As a parent with kids that have gone through the schools, it's unacceptable. And I was just thinking, you said a couple things, our curriculum and these conversations in our schools, by the way, they're secret conversations. None of
Yeah,
this has to be exposed to your parents. It's very unusual that there's a program like they have in Florida. They've got good leadership in Florida that's
yeah,
elevating the role of the parents again. That's very unusual. And even in states where you think it's buttoned down, this garbage is still happening. It's
yes,
happening in secrecy, it's happening in silence. You mentioned manipulate. I would use the word grooming. We would never allow any adult
mhm,
to have these conversations with our 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 year old, 16-year-old. I would never allow a neighbor, a friend, a babysitter to have these conversations. In fact, I would say it would be criminal. There would be a big problem between you and your neighbor for sure. You would definitely not let your child be around those neighbors again because these conversations, this material is completely out of bounds. What
right,
what do you and yet we use it in our schools all the time.
right. And if it was done in the workplace, it would be
Oh,
considered sexual harassment. So think about that. Again, it's common
yes.
sense. It's amazing.
Yes.
And that is why I don't know, mama bears, papa bears, rise up and be
Yes.
vigilant and never underestimate that you know your child better than anyone, right?
Yes.
Be very
Yes.
intentional
Yes.
about the values that you're communicating and
Yes.
show up, know what's being taught, ask to see the
Yes.
curriculums, show up at those meetings and, you know, as many times as they shut you down, then double your effort to not be
Yes.
shut down. We
Yes.
need voices, parents are the best flash mob we have.
Yes.
They
Yes.
really are.
And the moms have been showing up big time. We've
Yes,
had Moms for Liberty on here. We've had Parents Defending Education. We've had the leaders of great organizations that are organizing around the country to oppose this garbage,
yes,
this curriculum
yes.
that's destroying our kids. Tell me, so let's talk a little bit about your program, about the educational programs. Who is your target audience for the programs, and how do you get this training and resource to them?
Well, okay, can I back up and just do a
Yeah.
little public service announcement to those parents that you want to show up? On our
Yeah.
website, we have a Parents Matter guide,
Mhm.
and it's just a 3-page document that really will help that parent that's kind of feeling intimidated right now,
Mhm.
doesn't want to go into the schools. So we provide you
Yes.
with this guide and also some other resources that you can take in and maybe create a couple handouts, not graphic things
Fantastic.
but just good information. So I'll just say
That's
that.
fantastic.
But
And by the way, I'll list your website and all of your resources for sure, because we do want our audience to connect with you and get the resources that are necessary for them. So thank you for that.
yeah. Absolutely. Well, you ask about our target audience. Basically, Ascend exists to promote sexual risk avoidance education, and that came out of decades ago when comprehensive sex education, dispensing of condoms, and contraception seemed to be absolutely urgent because of the
Mm,
AIDS crisis in the 1980s. Well, there were some folks, especially initiated by in the Reagan administration, who said, "Wait a minute, why are we also telling our kids that it might not be good to have sex when you're in middle school or seventh
right.
and eighth grader or become a teen parent?" And that is when what people called abstinence only education. We don't even use that frame because it's or name. It's very inaccurate. Doesn't
Mm,
describe what we do. And so sexual risk avoidance was really born out of that.
love
And
that.
so it's an alternative into school. So we reach about 1 million students a year across the country in
Wow.
schools.
Wow.
Ascend, we certify. We have a certification program. You can become a sexual risk avoidance specialist, and so we train. And I'm really thrilled for your audiences to know that we have certified over 2,700 educators across the country. So when you go
Wow.
into a principal's office or to a superintendent's office or the Board of Education, you can offer an alternative to explicit, inappropriate
Mm.
grooming curricula, and that is sexual risk avoidance curricula. So we have a
Wow.
number of programs. We don't have a specific program that goes into the classroom, but we are in touch and we provide you the information of those who do. So there are a number of
Fantastic.
very high profile curriculums out there that people can offer, and all
Mm.
of that is on our website.
That's
So,
great.
and we want to make sure that our facilitators who are going in those classrooms, and the juggernaut of cultural messages
Yes.
that's coming down on our kids every day and creating chaos. We are
Mm.
always addressing those issues and providing ways to talk about language that can
Mm.
be clarifying to young students.
It's
So
fantastic.
that's our main mission.
So when you are, can teachers get certified in this, or can teachers get trained in this, and
Yes.
so they're prepared in the school environment? If they share your material, or if they share kind of the strategies and what they
Mhm.
know to help these kids, are they putting themselves at risk in the school district?
Well, I don't know of, I mean, when you talk about risk, okay, unless it is in a state where sexual risk avoidance education is prohibited by law, then, they may want to look at that issue. And knowing your state laws, we actually have a map that folks can click on their state and find out what the sex ed laws teach in their state or
Wow,
require.
fantastic.
However, sexual risk avoidance education also has a whole lot of information on what constitutes a healthy relationship. How do you
Yes.
build a healthy relationship? And so, there's all that kind of information too in those curricula that
Mm.
it would be very difficult to be you put yourself in at jeopardy
Yeah.
legally or whatever by
Uh-huh.
teaching good solid things that we know are protective factors for
Mm.
any child, no matter what
Yes.
kind of approach you're using.
Can you, so for me, this seems to me that this is a sweet spot to train people through churches, right? Because most people that go to church have a healthy idea about God's design for sexual behavior, and they have a real desire to be able to be armed with information and teaching strategies that can help them, even if they just have preteens or teenagers. Is this something that churches could connect with you and say, hey, we want to be certified? We want to teach these classes for people that come to our church?
Yes, and youth pastors, especially, we've certified
Yes.
a number of youth pastors come to our certification trainings. We have medical people, we have trained educators who are teachers in the classroom, and then we have counselors also
Mhm.
that are interested in that. So,
Man.
and these are programs that are brought in from the outside into the school,
Uh,
which is typically how it's done. But sometimes a school won't allow outside, speakers
yes.
because of the controversies that can become of that, which we understand.
Right.
So we do, we train trainers, right? So we train the
Right.
teachers.
I
Yeah.
love that. I mean, this actually is super exciting to me. I'm thinking about my church. I'm thinking about other churches in the area. That if we really want to make some headway in this area,
Yep.
let's get to the youth pastors. Let's get to the pastors. Let's teach
Mhm.
our parents how to engage in this area, because frankly, we're all winging it,
Yes.
right? I mean, Marianne, we're winging it, right? When it comes to the birds and the bees and teaching our kids. And the reason that's a problem is because the risk to our kids right now about this gender identity, these secretive conversations is so high. We've got to be better equipped. Isn't that right?
Absolutely. And I'll tell you, people knew what's going on. When kids are asked,
Mm,
what pronoun do you want to be called while you're
yes.
at school? What name do you want to use? When we contact your parents, what name should we use then?
Mm,
And I know some schools have closets where kids can come and change their clothes. And you've probably heard these things.
yes.
This is there is so much awareness that needs to be raised,
Yep.
because this is such a violation of parents' right and
Yes.
consent, and grooming, as you say, of
Yeah.
very vulnerable kids. And these are our kids. and,
Yeah.
and talk about moral courage and leadership. Are
Yes.
we What are we doing? How are we giving them foundations that
Yes.
are secure in who they are,
Yeah.
and what life is about? So
Yes.
what we teach our kids about sex, about marriage, and about relationships is very important.
Yes. And with all of the negative influences coming streaming through their phones, through the apps they have, through from friends, through Snapchat and all of the other avenues for
Mhm.
this, right? Parents, we're just constantly trying to put our fingers to prevent the dam from breaking in some
Yeah.
ways. This helps put us back on offense. And that's what I
Yes.
love about it. Is give us some
Yeah.
tools, put us back on offense so we can have a better voice of reason and a better voice of wisdom in this conversation. But I wanted to ask you specifically because the benefits of this training for kids are overwhelmingly positive, right? You talk on your website about some protective factors that
Mhm.
SRA education helps teens develop that helps them be
Mhm.
successful. What are some of these protective factors that, and I guarantee you when you list them, when we talk about them, every single parent is going to go, yeah, I want my teenager to have that. Yeah, I want them to have that.
Yeah.
I can guarantee you
Right.
this. They're not being taught any of this in most of our public school education. So the fact that they can get here, what are some of the protective factors?
Well, probably the biggest protective factor is a connection with their parents.
Hmm.
That's really communication with parents.
Wow.
Personal efficacy, autonomy. And by that, I mean that that child has a sense of who they are and what they believe, even at an early age,
Mhm.
because of the intentionality of the parent or caregiver who has, instilled that in them,
Yeah.
in a million different small and large ways as they're growing up.
Hmm.
You know, um, and then a resilience. Resilience is a huge factor.
Wow.
Unfortunately, we have so many trauma exposed children that
Mhm.
we deal with. And, trauma just has a reverberating effect. But when you have factors around them where they have good communication lines, not just to parents, but also to schools
Mm.
and also to social services where they can reach out, that is a protective factor
Yes.
that is huge. So and we're the program. I love this. Well, no, I don't love this. I am appalled at it,
Mm.
but I love what we do.
Mm.
All right. So if you go on and you examine some of the comprehensive sex education curricula, they talk to the kids about the fact that you can go you can go and get contraception and your parents don't have to know.
Wow.
And so here's a homework assignment. How would you get to the clinic that's downtown from your house?
Mm.
Would you have to take a bus? Would you be able to walk? Could
Mm.
you go with a friend?
Wow.
Could somebody older drive you? But they make sure to communicate to a student that they can do all of these things that put them at risk behind their parents' back.
Gosh.
What SRA, sexual risk avoidance education programs, do is we say, parents, we swing wide the door to you. Come in. Let's have a parent meeting. We want to show you our curriculum. How about if you take this home? Look at it. Are there things in here that we could do better?
Mm.
You know your child. What do you think your child needs? We want to partner with parents.
Mm.
And that is a huge difference,
Yeah.
because
Yes.
it's as though our children are being kidnapped right in front of our eyes.
Yes. It's true. I mean, it's maddening, right? And I'm sitting here thinking, I'm listening to what you're saying about how this is being taught in our schools. And I think you're being really kind about it too. I think, if we really peel back the layers, you could tell us other things that are being said to our kids. How could any teacher, counselor, health ed person be involved in this in any respect? Anyone with a conscience, how they could teach this garbage to put the child in opposition to the parent, to create these secretive conversations. There are a lot of great teachers out there that are in a very difficult situation, right? They want to keep their job, but I can't imagine under any circumstances that this being morally acceptable to any teacher to do this to kids or to present these opportunities to kids in this way. It's disgusting to me. And one of the things we're asking people to do is have a nationwide walkout, where if this is a matter of conscience for you and you're not going to continue along with the ideology, that teachers should walk out, counselors should walk out, administrators should walk out, and thousands and thousands, tens of thousands of kids should walk out. Parents should be pulling them out and finding opportunities for them. The great news is this: that's actually happening. Enrollment in my wonderful state of Colorado right now in the public school system is down in some areas by 50%. In California, the same thing is true. People are choosing other options like homeschooling and like homeschool co-ops and charter schools and other things. And it's a wonderful thing to see, because that's the only thing I think that's going to get the attention of our educators.
Absolutely. And I've seen those numbers also, Jimmy, and they are going down because, I'll work 3 jobs if I have to have my child in a charter school not to hear this.
Yes.
But, you asked, how do these teachers do it? How do some of them do it? Well, they bought in to the progressive radical ideology regarding, sexuality.
Yes.
But one of the things that they use is they say, well, the reason that we're keeping parents away from, or not telling them about their child who is trying to transition at school is because they suicide rates. Right. So it goes something like this. Well, you could either, do you want a dead daughter or a trans son? Now that is emotional manipulation that's going on, and it's terrible for parents and for teachers. So teachers are like, we're doing a good thing. This is, righteous. I'm putting quotation marks there. This is the moral high ground.
Yes.
However, the studies show that suicidality and suicide ideation does not increase, right, among this minor children transitioning. That is not an issue, but they're using that, to make this ploy that somehow this is gender affirming therapy.
Yes.
And gender affirming therapy that could lead them to cross-sex hormones and puberty blockers, the long-term effects of which we have no idea.
Yes.
And which, well, we know they become patients for life and all of that.
Yes.
But it is so heartbreaking,
Yes.
The manipulation, 13-year-old girls having double mastectomies.
Yes.
Really? You're letting life-altering decisions like that being made without the benefit of counseling.
Yes.
Now, when you look at the science, the medical and the social science all around across the world, what they advise is watchful waiting.
Yes.
Right? Because what do we know by science? More than 80% of students who go through puberty will resolve the issue and return to their biological sex.
Yes.
80%. Now, by anybody's statistical standards, that is an enormous, majority, and we should be looking at that and supporting it. And what are we doing? We're rushing them into life-altering surgeries and, manipulations.
Yes.
So I love the idea of the walkout.
Yes.
Parents, who else?
Yes.
Who better than parents?
Yes.
To advocate for their children.
Yes. One thing you just mentioned, this is such an important topic, right? And I think that we're bringing it to a head now. I think where people have to make a decision. I remember when I was growing up and we talked about peer pressure, And there was all kinds of peer pressure back then to do stupid things. And sometimes you did stupid things
Hmm.
and sometimes you didn't, right? Sometimes you avoided them.
Yeah.
Thank God for his
Right.
grace and protection in a lot of ways, so that horrible things it didn't happen a lot of times. But what we have now is adult pressure on kids. This is absolute
Mhm.
manipulation from an adult in a position of authority and power, making suggestions that will alter the direction of our kids' lives forever. And these are permanent, these are irreversible decisions a lot of times, especially
Yeah.
when you're talking about mutilation or surgeries, or even the puberty blockers are there. We use these for chemical castration of sex criminals. I mean, this is not like a new drug. This, we know what this does. We don't know what it does long term, but
Mhm.
we do know it's very, very bad in the short term. Um, I love this idea of empowering our kids. I think more than anything, what your educational system does, what this whole idea of SRA does, is it empowers kids to make healthy, positive, wise choices for their life. A couple more protective factors that they get from this teaching is they learn how to set healthy boundaries. And this one I like better
Boundaries.
than most of the others. It gets them to
Mhm.
embrace high expectations and gives them a sense of purpose and hope for the future. Is that true?
Absolutely. I love the whole idea of the high
Yes.
expectations. And we have all kinds of stories of, we have one story of a student of one of our trainers. She was teaching, she was substitute
Mm,
teaching for like a 6 month period. And they were in inner city. She had no books.
wow.
So she finally went and she went to the library and got a group of readers and she gave them to her fifth grade students and said, we're going to use these
Mm,
books. And at the end of the 6 months, she told those students who were now reading those books fairly well, guess what? Those are seventh grade books. You all didn't even know it, but you exceeded expectations, and they were so, proud of
yes.
them. They met the
Yes.
challenge. And, we have tons stories like that that just really encourage you to set the high
Yes.
expectations and show them the
Yes.
pathways. Also, Jimmy, I'll just throw this out really
Mm,
quick. And I know it's a huge subject. We could talk for
yeah.
hours. But we have been delving into the science of hope.
Mm,
People think, hope is just like wishful thinking, but hope is actually a science.
mm,
And there's about 2,000 studies on hope. And it is the strongest predictor of success in both your social life, your intimate life, your relational life. It's amazing. It's amazing work. So we're integrating hope,
love that.
into our curriculums
It's
also. And
amazing.
hope is, aspiring, giving those expectations to students, and then not just saying, do this and you can do this. Here's how to get
Mm,
there. And that's another protective
love
factor.
that.
It's a tool, critical
Yes.
thinking.
Oh.
So we're teaching students how to critically
Mm,
think. So we start out small. Here's the
yes.
problem. How are we going to solve it?
Yes.
What do we need? And we take them through that
Amazing.
process.
Amazing. I love that. Hope to me, hope and faith are similar, right? But hope to me is creating a positive expectation for the future. That what's coming is not to be dreaded or worried about or anxious about, but instead it's something to be embraced, something to lean in on and have a high expectation for your potential, for your purpose, where you're going, the direction you have. Is there anything more important than hope, right?
Really. And we all have that one
Yeah.
person or more than one person in our life that has sometimes made all the difference because they said, guess what? You can do
Yes.
more. I see you doing
Yes.
this. And it was just what you
Yes.
needed, to succeed. So we're always finding ways, we're always looking in sexual risk avoidance education. What can we do, especially for our trauma
Mm,
exposed
yes.
children? And we do have a great proportion of those,
Yeah.
that are experiencing
Wow.
trauma. So we're actually giving a webinar this coming
Mm,
August, which anybody can sign up
fantastic.
for. What does trauma look like in a classroom? So if you're a teacher in a classroom and you know your children are coming from backgrounds where trauma is very likely. What are some of the triggers? How do they act? And what can you do, to not trigger things or to help
It's
minimize it?
fantastic.
So we're having a licensed mental counselor do that training, that webinar.
That's amazing. And we're going to get the word out on that, because since our government is actively working against our kids and their futures, I think that's a pretty safe statement to make to anyone with a conscience, to anyone whose
correct.
eyes are open now,
Yes.
right? Removing the funding for this type of education is a significant problem. I think this is an opportunity for individuals, churches, parents to rally. What can parents do about it right now? If you were to say, hey, this is happening, but boy, there's opportunities here. What can parents, what can churches, what can others in the community do to fill in the gap at this point?
Well, first of all, show up, right? Never doubt that you are the best advocate for your children. And be vigilant. It's not a one-time thing. You really have to stay on, know what's being taught. And we know it's not just being now taught in one, type of class, family life or health or by, whatever. It's being taught all over. And so you need to make sure that even the environment is not sending a message, that we're not having flags and decorations that are what? Promoting an ideology that it may be controversial. Schools are for everyone, right? So we're not to promote religion. We should not be promoting sexual ideologies either. So that's one thing. But being vigilant and showing up and letting Congress people know, letting your representatives, your senators, your representatives know that you want an alternative to explicit, trans identity promoting, gender, fluid education, and that there is an alternative out there. Now, right now, on the government side and the funding side, there is a state block grant. It's called Title V that all states get, and they are eligible for, and they can teach sexual risk avoidance education. There's also a sister comprehensive state block grant called PrEP. So we have about $75 million, and it's divided up to the states in relationship to the number of students who live in poverty in a state. So there's an algorithm for that. But the standalone sexual risk avoidance education funding that was given to us by our champions in the Senate, in particularly Senator Blunt, who unfortunately is retiring, that was removed by the House just at the beginning of the month. And so we need, last month. So we need people to begin to contact their representatives and say, if you have the chance, if you are ever given a vote, this is the type of education we want and need. And it has been proven effective. So get engaged with your legislators on both the state and the national level.
It's fantastic. Well, Marianne, this has been a huge educational moment for me, for our listeners. I'm tremendously thankful for everything that you're doing with Ascend. This is a big deal. This is a great place for parents, for church leaders, for youth pastors, for concerned people in their community to connect, get the resources that they need, get the training, signed up for the live webinar so that we can start to get back on offense and take back this narrative about helping our teenagers make positive, safe, risk-avoiding decisions relative to their sexuality. Marianne, thank you so much for joining us today.
Sure. Well, it's been a pleasure. And go parents, anyone who cares about youth, come and see us at Ascend, and we'll have you back.
We're going to send them all the information, and we'll get them to you, and we'll grow the movement. Thank you so much. God bless you.
God bless you. Thank you.